Why do modern high-tech houses with gas heating freeze in just a few hours in the event of an accident, while primitive log cabins remain warm even in 40-degree frosts? We are used to thinking of medieval dwellings as cold, damp, and imperfect. But this is a myth. People in the past lived in conditions where a mistake in construction could cost the lives of an entire family, and therefore they knew more about thermodynamics than it seems to a person surrounded by radiators and thermostats. Architects of the past did not have insulation, vapor barriers, or modern materials, but they understood heat. They understood how it moves, how to retain it, and how to prevent the earth from drawing every last bit of energy from a house. They created buildings that did not depend on technology: thick walls, right angles, minimal contact with the ground, and ideal weight distribution. Every element, from the floor to the roof, worked as part of a single thermal machine. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why the absence of a foundation actually protected from the cold better than a concrete slab, how ordinary straw on the roof worked more effectively than modern insulation, and what forgotten principles of the past are now returning to architecture, because physics does not change, even if we stop noticing it. What if I told you that everything you believed about the location of a house is not true? Modern people choose the view from the window, while medieval builders chose life, orienting the house like a complex astronomical instrument. The first and foremost rule was not just to build walls, but to fit them correctly into the movement of the heavenly bodies. The windows of the living area always faced strictly south to catch every ray of the low winter sun. This allowed the room to be heated by natural light even on the shortest and coldest days of the year. The north wall was made completely solid, without a single opening or crack, turning it into a shield. This solid northern facade was often buried deep into the hillside or specially covered with an earthen embankment. The earth served as an additional layer of insulation that never froze through and protected against icy winds. The entrance door was never made on the windward side so that when opened, it would not cool down the only warm room. The wind rose in a particular area was studied by the elders for years before laying the first crown. If the wind blew mainly from the west, the western wall was reinforced with additional cladding or utility extensions. Thus, the house itself became an aerodynamic structure, streamlined by cold air currents. The roof was also designed taking into account the angle of the sun's rays at different times of the year. In summer, the wide overhang of the roof created shade and prevented the high sun from overheating the log house. In winter, when the sun was low on the horizon, the rays passed unhindered under the overhang and heated the wall. The wood heated during the day began to give off heat inside the room at nightfall. It was a passive heating system that worked without human intervention or the consumption of firewood. We have forgotten about this, relying on powerful boilers, but our ancestors used the free energy of nature. The location of the houses in the settlement was not chaotic or random either. The houses were placed in a checkerboard pattern or in groups so that they blocked the wind for each other. A lonely house on a hill is a romantic image from the movies, but in reality, it would be an icy tomb. Builders used natural barriers, forests, rocks, or river bends. They never cut down the entire forest around a dwelling, leaving a strip of trees as a living shield. Inside the house itself, the space was divided into zones depending on temperature conditions. The warmest places were reserved for sleeping and resting, while the cool corners were used for storing supplies. People did not fight nature by trying to heat the street, but created a microclimate inside a protected enclosure. The walls were thick not only for strength, but also to create thermal inertia. Massive wood heated slowly and cooled just as slowly, smoothing out daily temperature fluctuations. Interestingly, even the color of the wood was important in this complex heat exchange equation. Over time, the log cabin darkened under the influence of the sun and rain, becoming dark gray or almost black. The dark surface of the walls better absorbed the sun's heat on clear, frosty days. This physical property, known to us as albedo, was used intuitively but extremely effectively. Whitewashed walls appeared much later and more often in southern regions, where it was necessary to reflect the heat. The interior layout also eliminated drafts, creating closed air pockets. Partitions inside the log house, if any, were made of the same solid wood. This allowed only the part of the house that was currently in use to be heated. If the family was small, the far corners could remain cold, saving firewood. Everything was subordinated to rationality and strict economy of resources. The craftsmen knew that the corners of the house were the most vulnerable to freezing. Therefore, the corner joints of the logs were made with special locks that became tighter under load. The heavier the log house, the more the corners compressed, blocking the path of cold air. There were dozens of types of log cabins, and each was selected for the climate of a specific region. It was not just carpentry work, but engineering calculations for centuries. Today, we often see huge panoramic windows and complex broken roofs. It's beautiful, but from the point of view of heat conservation in a harsh climate, it's a disaster. A medieval house was a compact cube or parallelopiped, striving for minimum surface area. The smaller the area of contact with the street for the same volume, the less heat loss. This golden rule of geometry saved thousands of lives every winter. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about applying such principles of house orientation today, sacrificing beautiful views for the sake of warmth? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about why modern concrete foundations are inferior to ancient technologies? We are used to thinking that a house should be raised above the ground on a high concrete base. However, in the harsh climate of the past, this approach would have meant an icy floor that was impossible to heat. Medieval log houses were often built practically on the ground or on very low stones. This was done in order to use the geothermal heat of the planet itself. The ground under the house, protected by walls and snow from direct contact with the frosty air, never froze. It maintained a stable positive temperature coming from deep within the soil. Thus, the floor in such a house was heated from below in a natural way, acting as a huge warm battery. The underground space was filled with dry sand or ash, creating an additional cushion. During severe frosts, when the temperature outside was minus 40 degrees, the temperature of the soil under the house remained around 5 degrees Celsius. Modern pile foundations are exposed to all winds, turning the floor into a refrigerator. In old houses, they made a zavalinka, an earthen embankment along the lower crowns of the log house. The zavalinka closed the gap between the ground and the wood, creating a sealed contour. Dry moss or straw was often laid inside this embankment for better insulation. This turned the house into a kind of hill growing out of the ground. The floors inside were often earthen or clay rather than wooden. Densely compacted clay mixed with straw had excellent heat capacity. It was heated by the stove and retained heat for a long time, giving it off to the inhabitants' feet. Wooden floors appeared later and were often laid directly on top of the clay base. There was no wind between the boards and the ground, only a layer of still air. The entrance to the house was often sunk a couple of steps below ground level. This allowed warm air, which, as we know, rises, to remain under the ceiling. Cold air from the street, being heavier, accumulated at the bottom of the threshold without penetrating the living area. This heat trap principle worked effectively even with the door open. Nowadays, we build houses on elevated ground, allowing heat to escape outside. The lower crowns of the log house were made of larch or oak, which were not afraid of moisture from contact with the soil. These types of wood are so dense that over time they hardened, becoming stronger than concrete. Rot was prevented by burning the underside of the logs on a fire until a charcoal crust formed. Coal is an excellent antiseptic that prevented fungus and mold from destroying the foundation. This treatment allowed houses to stand on damp ground for centuries. The absence of a rigid foundation had another unexpected advantage in a frosty climate. When the ground swelled from the frost, the log house, being a single rigid structure, simply rose slightly. It breathed along with the earth, without cracking or breaking, unlike stone buildings. In the spring, the house would smoothly settle back into place, retaining its geometry. This flexibility was the key to the durability of the entire structure. The floor was covered with a thick layer of straw, reeds or skins, which served as an excellent insulating carpet. This layer was changed as it became dirty, always keeping the floor dry and clean. Straws, being hollow inside, contain air, which is the best heat insulator in nature. Walking on such a floor was warm even barefoot in the most severe frost. In some regions, they used the clay lock technology around the entire perimeter of the house. They dug a trench and packed it tightly with fatty clay, which did not allow water to pass through. This protected the space under the floor from groundwater and dampness, which is the main enemy of heat. Dry earth under the floor acted as a heat insulator, while damp earth would instantly draw out the heat. Engineers of the past understood that it was useless to fight nature. You had to use its forces. They turned the earth itself into an ally, forcing it to heat their homes. Would you agree to live in a house with an earthen floor for the sake of perfect warmth? What I am about to show you is prohibited in 12 countries as a violation of building codes, but it saved lives. The central element of survival was the stove, but not the kind we imagine in modern country cottages. It was a colossal structure made of stone or clay, sometimes occupying a quarter of the entire living space. The main secret was not in the power of the fire, but in the enormous mass of the heating device itself. It was not just a furnace, but a huge heat accumulator weighing several tons. The principle of operation was based on the ability of stone and clay to accumulate thermal energy. The furnace was heated intensively only once or twice a day, burning wood at maximum draft. The stone absorbed the heat of the flame, heating up to high temperatures. After the fire burned out, the damper was closed to prevent heat from escaping into the chimney. And then the magic began. The heated mass of stone slowly gave off gentle heat into the room over the next 24 hours. The stove was designed so that hot smoke passed through a complex maze of channels inside the masonry. The smoke transferred all its heat to the bricks or stones before escaping through the chimney. By the time it exited, the smoke was barely warm, which indicated an incredibly high efficiency. The energy of each log was used almost 100% with nothing wasted. The surface of the stove was often uneven, which increased the heat transfer area. The clay coating that covered the stones served as an ideal conductor and distributor of heat. If cracks appeared, they were immediately filled with fresh clay to maintain the seal. Carbon monoxide was a deadly enemy, so the integrity of the heart of the home was monitored more carefully than anything else. Special stones that did not crack from temperature changes were sought for building stoves. River cobblestones or sandstone were ideal, but granite could explode when heated. Knowledge of geology was part of every builder's survival skills. Clay for mortar was aged for years to achieve the desired plasticity and strength. In essence, people did not live in a house with a stove, but inside a huge stove system. The house itself was just a shell that retained the heat generated by this stone reactor. Remove the stove, and the log cabin would turn into an icebox in a couple of hours. This dependence on a heat source shaped the entire way of life. Modern heating systems depend on electricity and pumps. The medieval system depended only on the laws of physics, which never fail. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about survival in the Middle Ages. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your perception of roofs? We are used to thinking of straw as a sign of poverty, but in the Middle Ages it was a high-tech insulating material. A thick layer of straw or reeds, up to half a meter thick, worked better than many modern insulators. The secret lies in the tubular structure of the plant stems, each of which traps a tiny volume of air. Thousands of such stems, tightly packed together, created a powerful barrier against the cold. Warm air rising from the stove encountered this air cushion on its way up and remained inside the house. The roof did not let the heat escape, acting like a down blanket. At the same time, the thatched roof had excellent vapor permeability, allowing the house to breathe and remove excess moisture. The second important factor was the angle of the roof slopes. They were made steep enough for water to run off quickly, but still able to hold snow. Snow, which for us is a symbol of cold, was free insulation for medieval inhabitants. A layer of snow on the roof has a porous structure and retains heat well, blocking the wind. The space under the roof, which we call the attic, served as a buffer zone. Hay, dry brooms, and other supplies were stored there. This layer of supplies created additional insulation between the living space and the cold roof. The air in the attic was warmer than outside, but colder than in the house, creating a smooth transition in temperature. The ceiling in the living area was made of thick split planks, the gaps between which were filled with clay. A thick layer of earth, leaves, or sawdust was poured on top. The thicker this layer was, the less heat escaped upwards. Sometimes this layer reached 30 to 40 centimeters, creating an impenetrable shield. The roof overhangs were made very wide to keep water away from the walls. Dry walls are warm walls, as wet wood loses its insulating properties. Protecting the walls from slanting rain and wet snow was the most important task of the roof. Wide overhangs also created a dry zone around the house where firewood could be stored. Nails were not used in the roof construction, as metal is a cold bridge. A metal nail freezes through and condensation forms on its warm end. Moisture inside the insulation destroys it and conducts cold. Therefore, everything was tied with wooden pegs or ropes. Thus, the roof was a layered pie made of natural materials, each of which performed its own function. Straw, air, earth, and snow work together as a single system. Did you know that snow can keep you warmer than a wool blanket?
Bring that tongue down into the groove. Bind it. It's binding slightly. Use the mallet to settle it.
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the carpenters of the past, which modern builders often ignore. The walls of a log house were not just a set of logs, but a complex engineering structure. The key element was a longitudinal groove, a recess in the lower log that exactly matched the shape of the upper log. The logs did not just lie on top of each other, touching at points. They fit tightly together with the entire surface of the groove. Insulation was placed in this groove, dry sphagnum moss. This moss has unique properties. It does not rot, has a bactericidal effect, and expands when dry, filling all voids. The moss acted as a spring, compensating for seasonal movements of the wood. When the wood dried out, the moss expanded, preventing gaps from forming. The thickness of the logs was selected taking into account the climate. For harsh winters, the diameter had to be at least 40 centimeters. Wood is a unique material consisting of thousands of microscopic tubes filled with air. Across the grain, wood has extremely low thermal conductivity. A half-meter thick pine wall retains heat as effectively as a brick wall 1.5 meters thick. Special attention was paid to the selection of wood. Trees for construction were cut only in winter, when the sap stopped moving in the trunk. Winter wood was drier, denser, and less prone to cracking. Each log was inspected for defects. Knotty or twisted trunks were rejected for firewood. In the corners, they used a flush, or bowl, cut with a residue. This means that the ends of the logs protruded 20 to 30 centimeters beyond the wall. These protruding ends protected the corner of the castle from wind and freezing. The cold had to travel a long way through the end to reach the living quarters. The log house was first assembled dry in the forest, left to settle, and only then transported to the site and assembled with moss. This allowed the logs to take their final shape and fit tightly into place. After such settling, there were practically no gaps left. If any appeared, they were re-caulked by driving in tow with wooden spatulas until it was rock solid. The inside of the walls was often left unclad, leaving the logs exposed. The round shape of the logs better dispersed sound and heat, creating cozy acoustics in a microclimate. Flat walls reflect heat, while round ones distribute it. This was ergonomics dictated by the shape of the material itself. A wooden house was a living organism that was constantly changing but always stood guard over the warmth. It required care and attention, but it paid for it with reliable protection from the deadly cold. The entrance to the dwelling was the weakest link in the thermal defense, and the craftsman knew this better than anyone. Therefore, the door in a medieval log house was strikingly different from modern high openings. It was a low and narrow passage through which an adult had to enter, bending over significantly. The high threshold and low lintel were not designed to make guests bow, but to retain heat. The door leaf was made of thick, solid boards, often in 2 layers with insulation between them. Felt or leather upholstery around the edges ensured the vestibule was airtight, but the main protection was a system of vestibules or porches. A porch is a cold room in front of the entrance to the living area, which acted as an airlock. A person would first enter the porch from the street, close the outer door behind them, and only then open the door to the hut. The cold air remained in the buffer zone, not penetrating the Holy of Holies, the living room. The entrance door to the vestibule was also often covered with a thick cloth or skin, a so-called canopy. This soft barrier slammed shut under its own weight, instantly blocking the flow of air. The door hinges were forged to be massive so that the door would not sag and form gaps. The bolt was made of wood or metal, pressing the door tightly against the frame. No keyholes were made through which the wind could whistle. The doors were locked with bolts from the inside or outside. Interestingly, the door always opened inward. This was a safety rule. If a snowdrift higher than a person's height formed overnight, the door could be opened inward and a tunnel dug to the outside. A door that opened outward would be blocked by snow, turning the house into a trap. The door jambs were made of strong beams joined together with tenons. This construction was called an okosachka and protected the doorway from warping when the log house settled. The door always opened and closed perfectly tightly, regardless of how the house moved. The gaps between the door frame and the wall were also caulked with moss and covered with plat bands. A plat band is not just a decoration, but a windproof strip that covers a vulnerable joint. Each decorative element had a purely practical purpose. Beauty in those days was merely a consequence of functionality. This multi-stage entry system allowed heat to be retained even with frequent comings and goings. It was the same principle of airlocking that we use today in spacecraft, only instead of a vacuum, there was bitter cold. The cold had no chance of breaking through such defenses. The main enemy of warmth in a log house was not frost, but humidity. Damp air feels much colder than dry air, and damp clothes and bedding instantly draw heat from the body. Therefore, the ventilation and dehumidification system was critically important, although invisible at first glance. The stove acted as a giant pump that constantly drew air out of the room. Along with the smoke, moist, stagnant air escaped through the chimney, and fresh, dry, frosty air from the street entered through micro cracks. This air quickly heated up, becoming very dry and comfortable. Such natural ventilation prevented condensation from forming on the walls and ceiling. The house was constantly ventilated, but remained warm. Clothes were dried only in specially designated areas near the stove or under the ceiling, where air circulation was maximum. Wet laundry was never dried in cold corners. This would lead to mold and rotting walls. Mold destroyed the wood and made it loose, worsening thermal insulation. To combat dampness in the basement, special vents were made. Holes in the basement that were opened in the summer to dry the foundation. In winter, they were tightly closed to preserve the heat of the earth. This seasonal maintenance was a mandatory ritual for every homeowner. Bath day was not only a hygienic procedure, but also a way to prevent dampness in the living quarters. Washing and laundry took place in a separate building, the bathhouse, so that the huge amount of steam and water did not get into the living quarters. The house remained dry and therefore warm. People also made sure that the snow did not cover the walls above a certain level when the thaw came. Melted snow could moisten the lower crowns, But in frost, snowdrifts around the house were welcomed as additional insulation. A delicate balance was maintained between snow as insulation and snow as a source of moisture. Furniture in the house was often built in, carved into the walls, but there was always a gap between the benches and the wall for air circulation. The backs of the beds were not pressed tightly against the outer walls. Air had to wash over every surface to keep it dry. Humidity control was the highest level of survival skill. A dry log cabin could retain heat for days, while a damp one would freeze overnight. Our ancestors understood the physics of gases better than many modern ventilation engineers. Living in the cramped, confined space of a log cabin during the long winter required special psychological resilience. The feeling of warmth depended not only on the air temperature, but also on the atmosphere in the house. The coziness created by the soft light of torches or candles, the smell of wood and dry herbs played an important role. Psychological comfort helped to endure physical deprivation. The small space of the log cabin was not oppressive, but was perceived as protection, like a cozy burrow or nest. The absence of unnecessary things in visual noise created peace. The fire in the stove was the center of attraction. The sight of a living flame, or at least the glare from the firebox, gave a feeling of security and hope. Evening gatherings by the stove, storytelling, and working together brought the family closer. People did not feel lonely in the face of the icy desert outside. The sounds in a wooden house were also special. The wood dampened sharp noises, but at the same time it talked, crackling from the frost, creaking from the wind. These sounds were familiar and indicated that the house was alive and fighting the weather. The ability to find joy in small things, in the warmth of the stove, in hot food and dry clothes, was the basis of the mentality. People did not complain about what they did not have, but appreciated what they did have. This philosophy of survival made them invulnerable to depression and despondency. Which of these ancient technologies would you risk using when building your own home today? Would you agree to an earthen floor for the sake of an ideal climate? Or would you prefer modern but vulnerable solutions? Write your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn more about the forgotten technologies of the past.